Good morning, everyone. I'm Kevin Johnson. I'm the mayor of Sacramento, California, and the vice president of the U.S. Conference of Mayors. It is an incredible honor for me to be here today in Birmingham at this time to be in 16th Street Baptist Church on the dais. Much has changed since that historic day, horrific day actually, 50 years ago, when 4 beautiful little girls were murdered just over here. That horrific bombing that we all remember. Adie Mae, Cynthia, Carol, Denise, their names live on in our great country. Just 50 years ago, we as a country have made great progress since then, but we have much to do. President John F. Kennedy addressed the U.S. Conference of Mayors during its annual meeting in Honolulu, Hawaii, and the topic was race relations, which he called back then a national problem. He also said it was a national challenge, a national responsibility, and a national opportunity. While he told the mayors that events in Birmingham have stepped up the tempo on the nationwide drive for full equality, he also cautioned mayors, even at the federal level, it's going to take everyone's responsibility, and mayors lead the way. He asked mayors then to do 5 things. Number 1, to establish biracial human relations committee. Number 2, to ensure that local government ordinances and practices are constitutional. 3, to follow non-discriminatory practices in employment and the promotion of municipal workers. Number 4, to enact equal opportunity ordinance to spell out the civil rights of those who live in our cities, including rights for equal employment and access to public accommodations, especially as it relates to housing. And lastly, to lessen unemployment among low-skilled young people by reducing the number of dropouts. I am proud to tell you that the U.S. Conference of Mayors took President Kennedy's message seriously, and since then have adopted very strong policies as it relates to civil rights. We have talked about and supported voting rights acts, equal employment opportunities, fair housing, affirmative actions, just to name a few. We've also opposed all forms of discrimination, especially as it relates to particular groups of people. While our policies have been incredibly strong along racial and ethnic issues, we've also moved to include other groups that have been discriminated against. In 1984, we've adopted policies opposing discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation. In 2009, led by Mayor Chris Cabaldon from West Sacramento, we have supported marriage equality as it relates to same-sex couples. And just recently, we've adopted strong policies over the years in support of integration of the new immigration in our community. We know what the Dreamers represent, and I'm very proud of the U.S. Conference of Mayors. So what I'd like to do is bring up our host mayor at this particular time. We've been talking about how important it is, the progress that we've made, but our host mayor here in Birmingham is a leader and a champion, and he articulates the historic nature of what's going on today, and certainly will put it in perspective. He's done a great job of leading us through Empowerment Week. He gave mayors through the U.S. Conference of Mayors a day-to-day to really put this issue front and center. I asked him the other day, what does success look like? And he says success looks like this. Number 1, that everyone who comes into Birmingham leaves Birmingham uplifted after Empowerment Week. And for those who reside in Birmingham, you remain uplifted because the struggle is going to continue on. Let's give a round of applause for our host mayor, Mayor William Beck.
Thank you, Mayor Johnson. To all of the mayors who are here in this great southern city, Birmingham, Alabama, I want to welcome you on behalf of the citizens of Birmingham. I also want to welcome you to sacred ground. We have with us this morning Reverend Price, who's the pastor of this church, and we're just grateful to him allowing us to be here in this holy place. We want to make sure that the world knows the Birmingham of today, not just the Birmingham of 50 years ago. We want the world to see the progress that has been made, but it's also a work that is still in progress. But when you look at the work that the U.S. Conference of Mayors is doing, you realize that discrimination, intolerance, and things of that nature exist all over the world. And I'm so grateful that the U.S. Conference of Mayors has joined forces with UNESCO to help stamp out intolerance, to help stamp out prejudice, no matter where it's found. But here in this city, we have found a way to work together to overcome the past stigma of discrimination, the past hatred because of one's race, to say it's a new day. So I want to welcome you to be a part of this 50th commemoration. 50 years ago, when innocent lives were lost in this very church, 50 years ago, when the violation of the sanctity of this church was done. But we've come a mighty long way, and we still have a mighty long way to go. But the U.S. Conference of Mayors is at the forefront of leading that way. So thank all of you for being here this morning. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mayor Bell, for your leadership, your vision, and all the efforts that you've done here, certainly in Birmingham. At this point in time, I'd like to bring up our CEO of the U.S. Conference of Mayors. I'm going to ask Tom Cochran to come up and join me on the dais to make an important announcement about new efforts relating to civil and human rights as it relates to the U.S. Conference of Mayors in our undertaking and our partnership with UNESCO and the U.S. State Department. Tom Cochran.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm a Baptist, so I want to say thank you, Reverend Price. We're in your house, and I recognize where I'm standing. So we appreciate so much you opening up this church for us today. Be it not for Birmingham, we would not be here today. Be it not for Birmingham, we would not be here today. Those were the words of President Kennedy when he introduced the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Of course, he did that in 1963. And as Mayor Johnson has mentioned, the United States Conference of Mayors has been forever tied to the question and the struggle for civil rights in this nation. And when the first black mayor was elected from Cleveland, Ohio, we didn't form a black caucus. He called us, and he came in, and 2 years later, he was on our board. So we recognize that if it was not from Birmingham, we would not be what we are today. And when you look at this stage, and you look at our organization and what we represent, you need to understand that. We had the Brown case, we had Rosa Parks in Montgomery, but Birmingham was the ground center that gave us the moral courage. And we will never forget the men and women who went through what they did. And we have to say, thank God for Fred Shuttlesworth and for what he did. And for the first black mayor of Birmingham, you'll go across the street in a little while and see the Institute. And we thank God for Mayor Bell, who's doing a great job in making Birmingham a city with economic growth. And we're so pleased to look at the design work that he's done in this city with the Railroad Park. It's just a joy and a pleasure for the Conference of Mayors to be here in this fateful week. We thank Narissa Cook from the State Department. We also thank Marcello Azzarni from the UNESCO. I'm pleased to announce today that we have 50 cities that have signed on to our National Coalition Against Race and Discrimination. 50 cities have signed on. Marcello from Paris says it's the fastest growing nation on earth. And so it's just begun. We will continue. The struggle continues. We will continue to sign up more mayors because that's what it is. The United States Conference of Mayors is not a think tank. The United States Conference of Mayors is a do tank. And so we're going to keep the struggle. That's what it's all about. Thank you very much. On behalf of my president, Mayor Smith, who has a special city council election in Mesa, Arizona, could not be here, but on behalf of the Conference of Mayors officers and our staff, we're very pleased to be here for this historic moment. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mr. Cochran. I appreciate that. So what we're going to have today is two panels, one on economic justice, and our panel members are here. I'll introduce them in a moment. And then after that, we'll have a panel promoting tolerance, two really important issues. And then we're lucky enough to have our Dean of Mayors who will come up and address the crowd and give a unique perspective on the civil rights movement, Mayor Riley. So it'll be an action-packed morning here in Birmingham, which we're all very proud of. At this point in time, I want to just thank all the mayors and my colleagues who are in the office, who are in the audience, who flew in from around the country to be a part of this historic occasion. As most of you know that mayors are a little different than what happens in Washington. There's a lot of bickering and a lot of partisanship, but mayors are about bipartisanship. We're about results. We're about nonpartisanship. We're about getting things done and creating jobs. And we look at ourselves as leaders. And there are being books written about today as it relates to metropolitan areas and the impact that mayors are having around the country. So we are not going to wait for Washington to solve all our problems. We want to lead by example. It's a bottom up, and we believe that that's our strength in the U.S. Conference of Mayors. So at this point in time, I'd like to introduce our panelists, and then I'll ask each panelist to open up with a 3-minute kind of opening statement. I will ask the first question, and then we will open up questions to the audiences. So mayors, I know we have a lot to say, so I'm going to have you say a lot in a short period of time so we can get through as many panelists as possible. Our first panel is going to be on reaching economic justice. 50 years ago, after Birmingham civil rights movement and the March on Washington for Jobs for Freedom, while much progress has been made, most of the demands for economic justice have yet to be realized. African Americans are 3 times as likely to live in poverty and twice as likely to be unemployed as their white counterparts. The minimum wage is still not a living wage. Protests around the country, including in Sacramento, are making this point very clear. By inflation-adjusted standard, the minimum wage is actually lower today than it was in 1963. Our education system, marked by the persistent achievement gap, is failing to provide students with the tools they need to transcend their social position. The data on racial disparities in income, wealth, and social mobility cannot be any clearer. Consistent over the past 30 years, white families on average earned about $2 to every dollar that Black and Hispanic families earn. In 2008, white families were about 4 times as wealthy as non-white families. This is in the 21st century. Since the recession, white families are now about 6 times as wealthy, and Black children are twice as likely to remain stuck at the bottom income quartile as white children from families with the same income levels. In a recent interview, President Obama reflected, "Upward mobility," I quote, "was part and parcel to who we are as Americans, and that's what's been eroding over the last 20 and 30 years. Well before the financial crisis. If we don't do anything, then the growth will be slower than it should be. Unemployment will not go down as fast as it should. Income inequality will continue to rise. This will not be a future that we can accept," end quote. No, it is not a future that we accept. So at this point, I'd like to introduce our panelists. I'd like to start with Mayor Michael Nutter. He's our past president. He's in his 2nd term as president. I guess you can be a president in Philadelphia. The mayor of Philadelphia, which we know is the 5th largest city. He's worked tirelessly for economic, educational, and environmental justice. Mayor Nutter is, again, the past president of this great organization. We thank you very much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you. I also want to introduce Mayor Paul Soglin. He's a veteran and a mayor of Madison, Wisconsin. He was first elected mayor in 1973 at the young age of 27. He has not aged much since then. He has served until 1979, tried to go find other work, brought him out of retirement. Then he was mayor again from 1989 through 1997, and then he's back again for mayor again in Madison. So Mayor, thank you so much for joining us. Like Mayor Soglin, Mayor Strickland joins us with a wealth of experience in both public and private sectors. She was sworn in as mayor of Tacoma in January in 2010 and has targeted smart growth strategies and doing amazing things as it relates to economic development in her city. So Mayor Strickland, thanks for flying. Probably the furthest to be with us today. And then last but not least, batting cleanup, is Mayor Landrieu. He was elected mayor in New Orleans on February 2010 with a mandate, essentially getting elected by 65% of the vote. The next day, he's got good fortune. The Saints went on to win a Super Bowl.
Win it again.
He said they're going to win it again. Got your head coach back. You got a good shot at it. My friend not only is doing great things around the Super Bowl and in the sports world, but the remarkable recovery that New Orleans has experienced under his leadership post-Katrina has been amazing. So at this point in time, I'd like each of our panelists to kind of open up on a statement as it relates to economic justice. And again, I'm asking each of you to take 3 minutes or so, and when you go a little bit longer, somebody in the audience will say 15 seconds to close up and wrap up your final thoughts. So at this point in time, I'd like Mayor Nutter, our past president, to share a little bit about the wisdom in terms of how we can leverage our body around the pursuit of economic justice. Mayor Nutter.
Mayor Johnson, thank you, and Mayor Bell, and certainly Tom Cochran, all of our panelists, Reverend Price, and everyone in the audience. I actually want to pick up in an area where Mayor Johnson was just a few minutes ago, and that's to talk about the issue of poverty. And certainly when we think about where we are right now, this incredible 16th Street Baptist Church, 2 weeks ago, the 50th anniversary of the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, and 2 weeks later, we're here. That march, that effort continues to this day, and we still seek jobs and freedom here in the United States of America. And so Dr. King's dream lives on and the work continues. Who would have thought at the same time, given some of the challenges that we face, I'm not sure that anyone 50 years ago would have thought that an African American would be elected President of the United States of America. And so that gives you a sense of the continuum of where we've been and how far we've come, but we certainly know that we have a ways to go. And so I want to talk about the issue of poverty across the United States of America, and then more specifically in the city of Philadelphia. Unfortunately, we have a very high poverty rate in Philadelphia, the highest of the top 10 cities in the country. And poverty has a tangible cost to lives and opportunity. Less money spent in the economy, less economic opportunity for individuals who suffer in the throes of poverty, and as adults and certainly children, as well as dealing with issues of literacy, education, and upward mobility. We've put out a plan in Philadelphia called Shared Prosperity Philadelphia. We looked at all of the various sources of funding that come from the state and federal government and realized that we're spending about $700 million from different agencies in silos, everyone believing that they're doing their work and doing it well, but not coordinating with the other agencies. And so we have put all of that funding under one umbrella, created a new anti-poverty office, community empowerment and opportunity, CEO, and better manage the resources that we have. Set certain goals and benchmarks and guidelines on how we address the issue of poverty in Philadelphia, while at the same time focus on the true 21st century civil rights issue, which is the issue of education and educational access. 50 years ago, folks, of course, were fighting for access to a lunch counter. They were fighting for access to a job. They were fighting for access to be able to live wherever they want, or love whomever they want, or marry whomever they want. Today, we're fighting for economic access to the internet and to a great education and to funding education properly all across the United States of America, but certainly a current fight in Philadelphia and in Pennsylvania. Education will lift folks out of poverty, give them access to the resources of our country and the world. And so our fight in Philadelphia is to make sure that the 500,000 or so people who are not reading at a proper level today get the access to resources that they need. We've used federal resources to create something we've called Key Spots, 77 computing centers all across the city of Philadelphia using federal funds. They created jobs, but more importantly, they create economic access for young people and those who are young at heart. And so the issue of poverty and how it affects cities and our economy, but more importantly, our people, is, I believe, an issue that we need to focus on. If we're going to talk about economic justice, then we have to grapple with the issue of poverty and education and how those issues are tied together. And that really is the work and the march that still needs to take place 50 years later. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Mayor Nutter, and we'll get a chance to come back to some of the things that he talked about. So again, a strong leader in our country. At this point, I'd love Mayor Soglin to kind of give some remarks as well.
Thank you, Mayor Johnson. As I share a couple of thoughts with you, I think it's really important to focus on what Mayor Nutter just repeated over and over again, which was the word access. If we're going to truly achieve justice and equality, there must be access. When those young men and women sat at the lunchroom counter, they weren't talking about simply access to a hamburger or a soda. They were talking about access to a job, to managing, and to owning that lunchroom. When they sat in and Rosa Parks rode the bus, she wasn't talking about just the bus ride. She was talking about driving the bus, working for the company that manufactured the bus, managing the bus company, owning a bus company. And when those young men and women entered those schoolhouses, they weren't talking about just being there as students. They were talking about being there as teachers, as superintendents, as chancellors, as presidents of universities. And that's been the failure of the past 50 years. While we've opened some of those doors, we have not developed the access to the systems that will create true economic justice. As we've looked at our successes and failures over the years, I believe that there are 5 areas for which we need collaboration and for which we need a joint effort at both the local and the national level. They are, first of all, the learning process, whether it is education or it is job training. Secondly, it is transportation. If you can't access the job, if you can't get there from here, the job does no good. There has to be quality child care. One parent by themselves, 2 parents who are both working, certainly cannot provide the child care inside the home and be at the job at the same time. We know the importance of quality child care. There must be health care. We can't have children in this day and age repeating what I saw in my own classroom, which is sitting at the very front because they can't see the board. They can't see what's written on the walls. And lastly, there has to be housing. Without housing, without a fundamental place to go, there is no opportunity for a family to be coherent and to, again, get access to these systems. Along with that access, we need trust. And that's the great challenge for our nation and, in fact, for the world. It's been a very difficult road that we've gone through over the last 50 years. There's been tremendous success. But just as there's been tremendous success, there has been tremendous disappointment. And our job, not in the next 50 years, but immediately, is to deal with those disappointments and eradicate them.
All right, thanks, Mayor. At this time, I'd love for Mayor Strickland to give her initial thoughts on economic justice. Mayor Strickland.
Thank you, and it's an honor to be here today, especially in this historic church. Every person who takes the oath of office for mayor agrees to uphold the Constitution. And the preamble of the Constitution says this, because I think it's really important to remember our history. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. At our breakfast earlier this morning, our friend from France talked about America's history, and it's an interesting one. There's a legacy of slavery that is still felt today, but there was actually an Indian Expulsion Act. We expelled Chinese people. We interned Japanese Americans. We had to fight for civil rights for African Americans and many people. We had to fight for the right for women to vote. And even today, we were having great debates about immigration reform and what that means. So this country has a very, very interesting history when it comes to justice in general, but especially economic justice. At the local level as mayors, we have opportunities to work directly to do some things. Now, we can't control the decision that every business makes, but we can set policies to encourage economic development and also have rules in place with contracting to ensure that people who get contracts with government are a true reflection of the community that they serve. We also have opportunities to stand up for policies that do affect economic justice. Young women who have children who are not married are more likely to end up in poverty, and so are their children. When you take away a woman's right to choose, you may actually consign her to a life of poverty with her children or her unborn children. Another thing that we also have to talk about, too, is what exactly is the definition of economic justice? In 1964, when we had the Civil Rights Movement, it was about jobs and about freedom. But you can have a job and not be free. And you can have freedom and have a job and still be in chains. So it's important for us to look at the things that help people become empowered. There's a big debate happening right now in my own city about paid sick leave. You see the labor movement moving forward now, trying to recruit members who don't belong to unions because they understand that as union membership goes down every year, the middle class suffers in America. So we have to make sure that there's a middle class that is strong and that is vibrant. And when I talk to my friends in the business community, I say this: if you want your business to succeed, you have to have consumers with buying power. We all do better when we all do better. Now, we've made great gains as a country as far as civil rights, but there's a lot of work to do. As Mayor Johnson said earlier, the unemployment rate is disproportionately higher for people of color. The incarceration rate is disproportionately higher. When we look at the educational achievement gap, disproportionality again lingers. So we know good and well that we still have a major hangover from the institution of slavery and other decisions that we've made. But as mayors, we work in a bipartisan manner. We work together because we're about getting things done. So thank you very much for the opportunity to be here today.
All right, thanks, Mayor Strickland. All right, Mayor Landrieu, give us your remarks, sir.
Mayor Johnson, thank you. Reverend Price, thank you so much for having us at the 16th Avenue Baptist Church. It really is awe-inspiring, actually, to be sitting here at this place where history changed for a lot of different reasons. And I'm mindful of and adopt the comments of all of the mayors up here. Mayor Nutter spoke about poverty, spoke about health care, spoke about education. Mayor Scotland talked about child care and other issues. One of the gravamen of the comments have been that the institutions that have given aid and comfort and support so that human beings can actually grow up and enjoy the fruits of life are deteriorating in the United States of America. I say that because in the shadow of 2 weeks ago, when President Obama stood on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, on the shoulders of Dr. King, in the shadow of Abraham Lincoln, who was there on the shoulders of Wilbur Wilberforce and Frederick Douglass and Harriet Beecher Stowe. We have to acknowledge that we have come a long way in this nation. It is quite amazing, and you can see the cadre of mayors, elected officials, scientists, doctors, lawyers, athletes that are physical manifestation of how far we have come. And we have to take a moment, though, to recognize that we still have a very, very long way to go. And I think the first thing that has to be said forcefully is that if people in America think that we are beyond the issue of race, they're wrong. we have many, many ways to confirm for us that we still have a very, very long way to go. President Clinton said in a report that he wrote that we're halfway home and we have a long way to go, and I think we have to acknowledge that. All of the issues that were spoken about here today are very important. The one that rises to the level of emergency for the people of the city of New Orleans, and I think the people of America, is a level of violence on the streets of our city. It is really hard to have economic justice if you're struggling to survive from day to day. In some instances, the civil rights movement, I think, assumed that people actually would be alive during that period of time and had the freedom to struggle for a better education, to struggle for a better job. But the catastrophic loss of life on the streets of America every day is challenging neighborhoods and families and individuals' ability just to get to the next day. And that's one of the things that, in my opinion, we have lost our way on. John Lewis, and I paraphrase, said not long ago, you know, we didn't get beat on the way to Selma so that people could kill each other. And there's too much of that going on in America, and it is an issue that we have to address. As we speak about the United States' moral responsibility abroad, which we have, we don't always speak about our moral responsibility at home to make sure that each individual has the access to the essential freedom, which is to walk the street safely without fear of not being able to go home and see your mama. And so as we think about Addie Mae Collins and Denise McNair and Carol Robinson and Cynthia Wesley, and we're here 50 years later commemorating the taking of their life, we may forget London Samuels in New Orleans, who was 1 year old, who was shot last week. Or we may forget Arabian Gales, who was 11, that got shot the next day. Or Jeremy Gallman, who was 2, who was in his grandmother's arms when he was shot. Or the whole host of victims, 40 before the stroke of midnight tonight. And when you speak to that issue and you ask why that's happening, it takes you to all the other issues: education, dropout rates, poverty, babies having babies. Really, really difficult issues that I think that we have to consider to be the unfinished work of Lincoln, the unfinished work of King, the unfinished work of this nation. And Mayor, as you say, as we strive to form that more perfect union, I think we have to admit that we all have a very, very long way to go, but we will not get there if we don't front the issue, if we don't talk about it. And that, of course, is what mayors do, because as Tom said, we're a do tank, not a think tank. And so I'm thrilled to be with all of you today to talk about specific ways to actually get us to that aspirational place called the more perfect union. Thank you.
Thanks, Mayor Landrieu. All right, Mayor Nutter, I'm going to start with you, and our topic is economic justice. But since this week is so historical, I'm going to ask you a slightly just different question first. You were there in D.C. a week or so ago on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial when President Obama, an African-American president, made his remarks. And prior to that, you had President Carter and President Clinton, you had John Lewis, you had Andy Young, you had all these legends. What were you feeling during that time as you sat out there and watched that take place?
It was, I think I'm going to use a term that Mayor Landrieu mentioned. I mean, it was awe-inspiring. It was a realization of, you know, kind of, for myself, trying to think back 50 years. So, you know, I was like 6 years old. And, you know, 6-year-olds are not thinking about, most, we're not thinking about growing up being mayor one day. But it happened, and it can happen. And it's a reminder of what is public service all about. What are we supposed to be doing? How do we utilize the gift that we've been given, the tools that we have, the inspiration that has been provided, and the example. Mayor Landrieu talks about Congressman John Lewis's comments. Folks sat at lunch counters, as Mayor Sogin said, not just to get a meal, or rode on a bus, not just to get from point A to point B. This was about dignity. This was about respect. This was about the sign, that iconic sign that we would see all the time, I am a man. And there should have been some that said, I am a woman. But that was about human dignity. And so it, for me, is really a reminder of what this work is all about. And, you know, I always appreciate gains, but I'm never really satisfied. And as long as we have the homicide rate, even though it's going down, in the United States of America that we see, and Mayor Strickland talked about the incarceration rate, the illiteracy rate, the unemployment rate, every possible indicator that you can measure. In many instances, on the good side, African Americans and other people of color are at the bottom, on the bad side, at the top, and especially black men. And so, for me, it was you know, the awesomeness of the moment, but also a reminder that when we get back home, there is still more work to be done. And how do we address these issues? And as a nation, and I'll close with this, what is our national poverty reduction plan? What is our national anti-crime strategy? What are we doing as a nation to raise literacy rates and significantly lower the unemployment rate? How much money would we save? But more importantly, how many lives would be saved or improved if we were able to put all of those resources together and coordinate the way that we try to do in our cities, but we cannot solve all of our problems by ourselves as mayors of the great cities of the United States of America. And this is where state and the national government really have to be partners with us.
Great. Thanks for that, Mayor Nutter. Mayor Strickland, I'm going to ask you a quick question as well, historically speaking. In this church, there was a bombing, 4 little girls, you being a young lady. And there's often a story that people don't remember, but there were survivors as well. So not only do the 4 little girls and their spirits live on, there was a young lady named Sarah Collins Rudolph, who could have been a 5th, who is still living in the Birmingham area. What is your perspective as a woman as it relates to these 4 little girls whose dream had been snuffed out, but their memories and spirit lives on? How has that motivated you for what you do?
There is nothing more devastating than imagining children dying. And not only were there survivors of that bombing who could have been victims themselves, there are parents who raised these young girls. So when I think about them as victims, it is sad, it's profound, but also it inspires us. Now, we know that those bombs were put here by the KKK during a period in America that wasn't our shining hour, but we have to let their memory live on for something good. We are sitting here in this church today, and that's very, very important. But it also reminds us of what could have been possible for those young girls had they lived. What would their lives be like today? I don't have the answer to that question, but it's really about understanding that no life is more precious than the life of a child. There's nothing more devastating than a parent having to lose a child. And all the work that we do as mayors, and especially your leadership, Mayor Johnson, on education and education reform, we have to understand that every successive generation must do better. It's our responsibility as leaders to ensure that they do better. So that's my memory of those young girls.
Awesome. All right, Mayor Scoggin, I'd love to ask you one question historically as well. This movement for civil rights is not just about African Americans or those left on the sidelines, and we as mayors understand the importance of convening and bringing different sectors and people together. So from your perspective, not just African Americans, what did you believe everybody else's responsibility was and has been and should be as it relates to the civil rights movement as we stand here today, 50 years from what transpired in Birmingham?
It seems to me that it's not good enough to say I am a person of goodwill, that we have to learn that there's a higher standard. I commend those companies that buy the advertisements for the banquets, buy a table at the annual dinner. But we have to ask a more profound question. When we walk through the halls of your company and we look into the offices, do we see a workforce that's not reflective of the larger community, not reflective in regards to race, to gender, to religion, to the diverse ethnic communities within your city. I liken it, and maybe this is crass, but I liken it to this. If every morning you were to wake up in your city and there were to be millions of dollars of gold in the city streets, would you not be foolish to let it lay there? Would you be better off picking it up and utilizing that economic resource? Well, when we look at our cities today, with tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of men and women, and I'm not just saying young, I'm saying of all ages, who are not participating in the workforce, are we not losing those millions of dollars of resources to our economy that they would contribute? It's not good enough to say I'm a person of goodwill. We need action, we need decisions, and that's the only way we're going to reach this next level, because right now there's a significant number of Americans who think that we're out of the recession. The stock market's hitting new records. For much of white middle-class America, the worst days are behind us. But we've got cities in this country where African Americans, Latinos, Asians, they're still at 25, 30% unemployment. And that is unacceptable, and I don't know what else can be said, but thank you.
Thank you. All right, last question on historical, and then we'll jump more specific on what mayors are doing. So Mayor Landrieu, for you, we talk about the march, we talk about the 16th Street bombing, we know what took place on Bloody Sunday, certainly the Edmund Pettus Bridge, Montgomery, Mobile, Selma. You have a unique perspective because your father also played such a historic role as it relates to civil rights, and you in New Orleans have interacted with people of different persuasions. What is your kind of sentiment as you reflect back on where we are from a race standpoint and from a historical standpoint in celebrating the March on Washington?
You know, I went back and looked at some old papers. I was just born and in my mother's arms when my father, who was one of 105 legislators, was one of two that voted against the segregation package of Jimmy Davis, and basically have lived my entire life in this space, in a wonderful city where the SCLC was formed many, many years ago, but unfortunately, right across the street where 24 years later, a little boy named James Darby was shot by another guy named Joseph Norfleet. So I have two thoughts about it. Number one, the civil rights movement was clearly about, at that time, making sure that African Americans had justice and equality, but it really just wasn't about African Americans. It was about whether the United States of America was going to live up to its aspirations and its potential. And the larger message is that where some Americans go, all of us go. And where some of us don't go, all of us don't go. We are one nation, indivisible. And that word is really, was written for a purpose. What it means is that we're inextricably bound with each other. And so in a major city, whether it's majority, minority, or not, if 30% of the people in that city don't have access to, take responsibility for, availability of health care or whatever that does not allow them to be productive, giving citizens, then they're not. And the entire body of the community suffers. And so as Paul said, and I think it was beautifully stated, I mean, would you really walk by a spot of gold on the street and not pick it up? And how wasteful is it to have something that's so valuable and just to walk past it? And so as Mayor Nutter said, and I want to make a distinction here, he said, where is our national? He didn't say federal, he said national. Those are different things. This is not about the mayor's going to the federal government saying, solve our problem for us. But what it is about is those of us that have the great pleasure of serving people in the city, saying, where is our national purpose and our commitment to make sure that we as a nation are strong? And this is not just a domestic issue. It is a national security issue. You have people like Richard Haas, who was a national security advisor for many presidents that were interested in being abroad, who has postulated that we really cannot be strong abroad if we're not strong at home. And it is a worthy question to ask at this particular poignant time as we contemplate, along with the president, what our actions are going to be on an international front, whether the United States of America has done what is necessary to be strong at home, because the strength of this country is built on the foundation of the value and strength of each American citizen. And so in the city of New Orleans then, if 47% of the young African American men between 16 and 32 are not employed, or they have dropped out of school, or they are not in a constructive place, the question then gets to be, how important is that weak link to the country? And I would postulate to you that it's very strong. And I would finally say this, that as elected officials, we don't hear the word poverty much in the debate. We have to grow a middle class. The middle class is really the basis of the country. But in order for somebody to get to the middle class, if they're not there, they have to be someplace else. And that someplace else is poverty. And there has to be a specific way to come up with a plan to say, what are the specific steps? What is the pathway to prosperity? Is it a better relationship between the federal assets and the state assets and the city assets, as Mayor Nutter has championed? That's part of it. Is it, as Mayor Scoggin said, corporations really begin to understand and put their money where their mouth is and making sure that their employee ranks reflect the community? Is it a better relationship between primary and secondary education, early childhood education, job training? The answer is it's all of the above, but it has to be purposeful, and it has to be thoughtful, and it has to be moving to a specific target that the nation sets for itself, because that's what we think is in the best interest of the country.
All right, thanks, Mayor. So now that we're warmed up and on fire and ready to go, Mayor Nutter, I'm going to have you build on a little bit on what Mayor Landrieu talked about. You talked about in your opening remarks poverty. And I've heard you make the connection of poverty and youth violence and limited opportunities, and then those who are disproportionately incarcerated, and then when they come out, there's not. Talk a little bit about what you are doing in your city, because you have a unique perspective, and I think Philadelphia has what I would like to think is a national example of what cities should be doing. So, Mayor Nutter.
Thank you, Mayor Johnson. I've said a number of times, certainly in Philadelphia and in some other places, to pick up on where Mayor Landrieu was, that I consider education education should be considered part of the national defense of the United States of America. That the military, and our might is incredible, but we will win the battle for freedom and justice based on a well-educated population. That smart folks figure out a way to take care of themselves. And with every respect to the military, they're not having bake sales to get the tools and equipment they need to do the job that we ask them to do. They pretty much get what they need. Mayor Landrieu has talked extensively about, and many of us, of course, who flew in, love the TSA, wonderful organization, make sure everybody is safe. I want to know, where's the TSA for walking around my neighborhood? Yesterday, we recognized the 12th anniversary of the most horrific attack on the United States of America since Pearl Harbor. We have attacked the issue of international terrorism and the security of the United States at an unprecedented level. Created an entirely new agency out of whole cloth, a cabinet position, funded it, 60,000 people work there, an $8 billion budget, because we want to be safe flying around the United States of America. And I applaud that. And I do feel secure. We flew yesterday. That same level of commitment and focus on the education of our young people, on helping those who have made a mistake. We are here in this historic church. And so if there is not an opportunity for a second chance or to ask forgiveness here at this church, what kind of Americans are we? I don't know a person who's not needed a second chance at some point in time. And so if you have very few skills, didn't graduate from high school, have not really worked at a full-time job, do something wrong, pay your debt to society, and come out with the same bad friends, the same lack of skills, the same lack of education, the same lack of job opportunities, and no one will give you a job, no matter how many doors you knock on, why would we expect a different outcome for that person? The number one indication for whether someone will return to prison or not is whether they get a job within the first 3 months of their release. And so we've spent a lot of time focused on, I don't use the term ex-offenders. I talk about returning citizens. We do not call someone who's had a drug alcohol problem an ex-alcoholic. We say that they're in recovery. These are returning citizens. They paid their debt to society. We had a job fair for returning citizens in Philadelphia. 3,200 people signed up. 2,500 folks showed up.
Wait, 2,500 people showed up for a job fair?
For a job fair, all for folks who had a previous criminal record. We had 100 employers there. They knew the population that they would be addressing. They were enthusiastic. Folks want to work. They want to take care of themselves. They recognize that there's dignity in work. They don't want to be out on those street corners. But if we don't provide the alternative, that's where they will be. You don't have to take a test to stand out on the street corner. But there are no benefits that go with that. And so poverty, crime, education, literacy, they are all tied together. That is the way that we will move our cities forward. But more importantly, it's about human capital. It's about investing in people. And so as mayors and through the conference, we fight these battles at the national level. I do not understand, and I will be partisan for a moment, I do not understand why the House Republicans would cut the CDBG budget by 50%. I do not understand why we don't have, across the United States of America, universal Head Start. We know for a fact, it is a documented fact. You don't have to study this one anymore. The kids who participate in the Head Start program and get off to a good start in preschool and grades 1 through 3, if you are not reading at grade level by the 3rd or 4th grade, you will struggle through middle school. You are most likely to drop out of high school. And the overwhelming majority of folks that we arrest for violent crime in Philadelphia are high school dropouts. You don't have to be a social scientist with a whole bunch of letters behind your name to make that connection. Anybody could figure that one out. So those are some of the things. And so we have an office to provide services to people who have a previous criminal record, and we're trying to get them back into civil society. You will reduce your public safety costs when folks who were in prison are now working, paying taxes. I spend 30% of my budget, 30%, before I pick up the first bag of trash, 30% on public safety, police, prisons, courts, probation, parole, and the district attorney. Think of how much money I could save and put into after-school programs and job training programs and workforce development and parks and recreation and swimming pools and all kinds of other activities if I didn't have folks running around who can't take care of themselves. I would never excuse, there's no excuse, even in poverty, for beating somebody up, stabbing somebody, or shooting somebody. I don't know why people commit those kinds of crimes. I know I have to make conditions such that they are not, that's not what folks are doing. And the proliferation of illegal guns on the streets of the United States of America is a national tragedy. It is a national crime against humanity in this country.
I warned you that we're getting warmed up. We have some young people in the audience. Let me apologize for his enthusiasm. He's a Philadelphia Phillies fan. They're not doing so well this year. So he's a little pent-up frustration there. Mayor Nutter, I would like to ask one quick follow-up on what you just said. How are you incentivizing businesses? You have a program that I believe you're doing tax
credits.
Yeah, so yeah. I think that is important for people in the audience and people watching to understand that we are not waiting for Washington to solve all of our problems locally.
Very quickly. So a couple of years ago, working with some of my former colleagues in City Council, we have a a tax credit available to businesses that hire someone with a previous criminal record. We will give you a $10,000 tax credit against your business tax obligations to the city if you hire someone with a previous criminal record, and you can maintain that credit for up to 3 years. Obviously, you have to keep the person working. Again, try to provide incentives. Think of, again, how powerful that would be if I could couple that with a tax credit against your state taxes and against your federal taxes. You could literally pay the person's salary and more if we were providing those kinds of incentives. And we should be doing other things, and we're trying to find some other creative ideas. But that is a population that needs to be addressed. And if folks are just wandering around trying to figure out what to do with themselves, unfortunately, they will get in more trouble.
Great. Okay, so Mayor Strickland, I read in my opening remarks a comment that President Obama talked about in terms of social mobility. In your community in Tacoma, what are some of the biggest challenges that the underserved community is facing as it relates to trying to achieve upward social mobility? Because if that doesn't happen, economic justice will not take place.
Well, the recession that we're experiencing has been a lot longer and a lot deeper than we expected. And the reason I bring this up is that the average age of a person who now works in a fast food restaurant is 29 years old. So when you look at those jobs being taken by adults who should be in different parts of the economic ladder, it means that younger people have fewer options for work. And President Obama challenged the mayors to come up with summer jobs programs. And I'm going to talk a bit about one that we're doing in Tacoma because there's a bit of a twist. I think every mayor sitting up here today has a youth summer jobs program. We launched ours last year, and we did it in a smaller measure because we wanted to test it out. We took youth violence prevention dollars, and that's what paid for it. So we told potential employers, you don't even have to pay for this. The city will pay the salary of this young person. So we had about 54 young people apply. And these were youths who were identified by school counselors and principals as possibly at risk. But here's the twist. These were students who were credit deficient, so they were about 2 or 3 credits away from graduation. We recruited these students. We gave them workforce development training. On Fridays, we had everything from financial literacy to how to dress for success, and also told them about mentorship and the importance of having someone at the end of your work experience who could vouch for you. These students, 50 of them, graduated on time. They were paid $10 an hour throughout the summer, and they now have a reference, a professional reference. 6 of them actually ended up getting full-time jobs through this program. So what we're trying to do is make sure that there are opportunities for the younger people who are being shut out of the economic ladder, but also trying to find ways to encourage job promotion and education. One of the things that I often talk about is how we sometimes forget that there is a whole industry of building trades. And 2-year college degrees and going into the trades, those are good ways to get good paying jobs. And we often talk about 4-year universities and professional white-collar jobs as though those are the only options available. So what we're trying to do is promote 2-year colleges, the building trades, electricians, carpenters, you name it, but also deal with the young people and trying to get them work experience so that in the future they are in fact employable.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Mayor. Mayor Soglin, you talked a little bit in your opening remarks about access. And you talked about 5 areas: learning, opportunities, transportation, childcare, healthcare, and housing. I would love for you to touch at least a little bit on access to healthcare, because when you think about this legacy of this president and how hard he has fought, that basic right, like public safety and education, healthcare is so important because the benefits, the affordability, the access are almost prerequisites to be able to have in place if we're going to be meaningfully employed and how those go together. If you wouldn't mind talking briefly on that.
Let's look forward, and then I want to step backward for a moment. But with the new Affordability Healthcare Act, we're expecting some great things if we get enrollment, if we get participation. In some of our states, and unfortunately mine is one of them in Wisconsin, we've basically got an absence of commitment. We have fewer people working through our state on creating access to the new healthcare system than there are in the entire city of Atlanta. Atlanta's got almost 3 times as many people working on it as our state has committed. I make this point because for a healthcare system to work, it not only must be affordable, but there must be access, and because of the intimacy involved in healthcare between the patient and the healthcare provider, there has to be trust. Now, about 15 years ago, we set up a program in Madison with a healthcare clinic, South Madison Community Health Center, was its original name. It was later retitled by the community board to be Harambe. And over a period of a decade, we started to see black infant mortality drop from the national levels down to a point where they were matching the levels for white babies. The question is, what happened? And we really don't know, because after a period of time it started drifting up again, fortunately not back to the high levels it was at. But one of the theories we have is that we created a clinic which was not the patient coming hat in hand to the healthcare providers. It was a system of community participation and a belief by the patient that I am respected, I am treated with dignity. This is all part of healthcare. And if we're going to make the new healthcare system work, we must respect the fact that it's not just about cost, but it is about human dignity. That is part of the gulf that we have in this nation in regards to our failures in healthcare, our failures in education, our failures in employment. That's the mountain we have to climb.
Awesome. Thanks, Mayor, for that. Mayor Landrieu, you articulate this so well, and we're not going to be able to talk as much about public safety. You gave one of the greatest speeches I've ever heard on public safety, and bar none. But what I think that you've also got at is post-Katrina, I've heard you say that cities cannot wait always on help from Washington. I'm a living example in New Orleans. But you also challenged us as mayors that you can't wait for a hurricane to fix some of your problems. Talk a little bit to us about post-Katrina and the economic opportunities that you're getting at as the most resilient city.
Well, Kevin, thank you for that. But this is just such a common question. You were a basketball player once, right?
I still am, I'd
All
like
right.
to think.
Why does everybody wait until the last minute to play their best ball? Right? What's that 2-minute drill in football? Whatever. A lot of people have asked me, does a city need a catastrophe to act? You know, one of the things I spend a lot of time thinking about is what moves us as a nation. Sandy Hook moved us. Columbine moved us. Syria has moved us. The 50th anniversary has moved us. Hurricanes will move you because they can. And unfortunately, we wait in this country until something bad happens to respond to it. And so the whole notion of resilience is really, really important, and it revolves around public safety. The question is, how do you prepare yourself for what you know may be coming or what you anticipate, and put yourself in a position of, no matter what it is, you're capable of responding in a forceful way so that your life is not at threat. And the people of the city of New Orleans, you see this happening in the Northeast. You actually saw it in Chicago as a result of some of the violence, that neighborhoods that are strong. So there's a common theme here, where there's strong individuals, strong families, strong churches, strong communities, people who know each other, neighborhoods that participate with each other, openness, access, dignity, trust. Those are resilient neighborhoods, whether it's a violent crime wave that comes their way, or a hurricane, or a tornado, or, you know, some other event they'd anticipate. This is what strength and resilience looks like. And so the people of the city of New Orleans, as a consequence of a lot of stuff, not just Katrina, what people don't realize is we were heavy reliance on the tourism industry because of all the major sporting events. After September 11th, the economy of New Orleans went to nothing. And after 3 years of just struggling to get back, Katrina hit. then Rita hit, then Ike, then Gustav, then the national recession, then the BP oil spill, and all of this happened while we as a nation were at war and were looking abroad. And so it was a particularly difficult time. But what has happened is, because the survival instinct is really strong, the people of New Orleans, in an amazing way, said, you know, not only no, but hell no. And we're going to get back up, and we're going to keep walking because this is what we have. And the thing that they did that is really, and that I'm continue to be amazed at, is they decided, and this is something every community has really got to think about, because your instinct when something bad happens is just to put it back like it was, because you want to just get back how you knew it to be. And it gave us an opportunity to look at ourselves and to do some real soul searching and to come to an uncomfortable truth that, as terrible as Katrina and Rita were, they did not cause all of our problems. They made what we had worse. And they made what was beautiful much more visible. And it gave us an opportunity to take stock and to think about reorienting ourselves. And that, in fact, is what's happening in the city of New Orleans. And so as the mayor talked about health care, instead of us getting health care in one central place that was called Charity Hospital, especially for the poor of New Orleans, we now have 88 primary health care clinics. We're working on using the resources that the federal government gave us not only to rebuild the city, but to use that as opportunities for jobs and to reconnect. Because we can't wait on Washington for everything, as the mayor said, we're doing something that I call facilitate Lincoln leverage, where we bring everybody together and say, look, show me what you got, I'll show you what I have, let's put it together. Maybe we can do a better job of partnering, because maybe we weren't as effective as coordinating our resources. As Mayor Nutter talked about, he turned that into a way of getting the federal government, the state government, the local government to coordinate all the resources, break down the silos, make government leaner, faster, more efficient, and more effective, and we're being forced to do that too. But having said all that, no matter how fast we run in the city of New Orleans, no matter how much we do, Mayor Nutter pointed out that there is going to be a resource gap, because the United States of America has not chosen as a country at this point in our history to focus our attention on building human capital. And the human capital and the investment in human capital, that means investing in individuals, right, is the thing that is going to make America strong. And as a consequence, it should not be a surprise to anybody that there is weakness in the neighborhoods and our ability to respond as quickly as we would like to. And the call for a national purpose on this issue, in partnership with the federal government, not just waiting on them, right, is really, really important, and something that I think mayors really understand, because we're on the ground trying to make it happen, and the gaps are really clearer to us in many ways than they are perhaps to other people.
Awesome. Thank you very much for that, Mayor. So we have about 15 minutes left. At this particular time, we'd love to open it up. If members from the audience would like to ask a question, we have mics on both sides. We'd ask you to come up to the mics and address a question. I see young people that are part of a group that have, I'm getting colorblind, so I don't know if it's a red or orange jacket. So whatever organization you got, the orange coats and jackets with the ties, one of you at least needs to come and ask a question. So whatever group you represent, we need you to ask a question. Is Reverend Price still here? Reverend, would you mind coming up? I want to ask you a question, and then you can then answer my question. Reverend, we just appreciate you so much for opening up the beautiful cathedral. I know you preach on Sundays about your ministry going beyond the walls of the church.
Right.
My question for you, or you may want to even direct it to anyone up here, is what are you telling the congregation today that is important that they need to know and remember about economic justice in terms of how far we've come or how far we've yet to come?
Well, basically, we preach a Bible-centric message here on Jesus Christ, but we also talk about how we could be empowered through the vehicle of education, as Mayor Nutter talked about, that we don't need more studies on education to let us know that our Head Start programs and our pre-K programs are working. So this is a church that is really, really about educating our young people and educating people in the community. We have various programs that we partner with the city of Birmingham to help, as Mayor Nutter talked about, returning citizens to come back into society On Monday night, we have a fatherhood program with Family Court, who labeled them deadbeat dads, and we teach them principles on fatherhood so that they can be able to take care of their children, because most deadbeat dads are dead broke dads. So in order to give them skills to work in the workforce, that'll help them and their families. And also those with drug court, those who are first-time offenders, they go through a course here at our church, and if they complete that course, they'll receive probation instead of going into prison. But one of the things that we talk about here at 16th Street is that we must continue to educate ourselves and to invest in the community around us.
All right, thanks, Reverend Price. Appreciate you very much. All right, young fella, tell us what organization you are a part of with your cool orange jacket, your name, where you're in school, and then pose your question.
Yes, sir. My name is Abe Williams. I'm here from Auburn University. I'm representing the Warrior Girls in Plainsman, and we also have other members from our student leader organizations here today.
Hold on.
Yes, sir.
Auburn that Charles Barkley went to?
Yes, sir. Auburn. Yes, sir.
Okay, there's a lot of pressure on you. I sure hope that you're going to be a better example for an Auburn graduate than my dear friend Charles, who is in process
Yes, sir.
of trying to get there. Go ahead, sir.
Yes, sir. Well, we appreciate you all letting us be here today. This is a wonderful event. And I just wanted to touch on education that you all mentioned, as well as strong communities. In our country today, it seems like some people have the opportunity to have a great education all the way throughout. However, in other communities, we know that's not the case. I want you all to speak on how can we make sure that those resources are going to the schools and the communities that truly need those education resources.
All right, any of the mayors, feel free.
Taxes.
Yeah. So we're going through a struggle in Philadelphia right now. So just probably more detail than you need. Many mayors across America are not directly in charge of their school systems. I'm one, but I have appointees to a state-created agency because Pennsylvania took over our schools, but unfortunately has been cutting funding for the past couple years. I took the position, I may not be in charge of the school system, but these are my kids. I take care of their parents' trash. I should have something to say about the quality of education that they get. And so the fight in at least Philly and really for Pennsylvania is that Pennsylvania is one of only 3 states in America that does not use a student-weighted formula to distribute funding all across the 500 school districts in the Commonwealth. And so it's really about equity. The quality of your education should not be a function of what zip code your parents decided to move to. In the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. The state, in our Constitution, says that the state is responsible to create a fair and efficient form of education all across the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. So issues of equity and their impact on urban school districts and rural school districts and suburban school districts, and some can raise their taxes much higher, and some, have really given a lot. And where is the state, and again, even federal resources for those communities? But I really think this is an equity discussion, and that there should be a baseline level of educational opportunity at every school. And if a local community wants to add on top of that, that's fine. But there should be certain things that are just standard. Art and music, from my perspective, are at least as important as English and math. They all have to be a part of a standard curriculum across the board for every child in the United States of America.
I like that. Awesome. Yeah. So before you sit down, I want to say each mayor up here believes that education is a top priority in our country. In fact, we all would say that is a civil rights issue of our time. And if we're not willing to pay the price and fight and lose some friends and do some of the things that folks in Birmingham have done for 50 years, then we're not going to get there. And there are far too many of our children that are being left on the sideline, and you guys are a perfect example. And I made a little fun of Charles Barkley earlier, but Charles Barkley, when he used to play in the league, he talked about, I am not a role model. And what he was actually saying is, not that athletes shouldn't be role models, but we shouldn't be the only role models. The role models are the people like yourself and the people that interact with young people on a daily basis, and we as elected officials need to do our part to engage as many people as possible to participate in this struggle to create an environment where all children have access to a high-quality education. So my last question for you, once you graduate,
Yes, sir.
what city are you going to live in? Because somebody's in trouble. What city are you going to live in?
Well, I hope to move back home to Atlanta, Georgia.
All right, I'm going to tell Mayor Reed he got somebody following in his footsteps. Good
All
luck
right.
to you.
All right. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
All right, yes, sir.
Hi. First of all, I just want to remind everyone that God is good. God is good
All the time.
all the time. I'm actually visiting Alabama. First of all, I represent the NBA. I'm one of the NBA kids, ambassador with Bob Lanier. Kevin Johnson should know Bob Lanier very well.
Absolutely.
We are here in Alabama to do an event at Jackson Olin High School. And I just came to the church to do my daily prayer. And I was pretty much just pretty blessed to be able to walk into this forum. And I just wanted to say thank you, first of all, to the people of Alabama, to the people of Birmingham, for being the birthplace of the civil rights. I think that a lot of us as youth have so much to learn from what started here. I live in New York. I work with the youth. I have my own foundation. And my question to the leaders is, what should we us as leaders be able to do for our youth to continue to empower them to follow the right path?
All right. Anyone, Mayor, want to address this? Mayor
I'd
Strickland.
like to. So I think there are two things that we can do, and I think part of this is an answer to the young man who was here previously. When we talk about how we can help our children, one of the best things we can do is to help their parents be people who are productive members of society. So while we talk about education, there's so much that goes on outside of a school building that has an impact on education. So what are we doing to ensure that people have decent jobs, that they're not living in poverty, that they have access to health care and even things like dental care? As far as how we can influence youth, if you look at a list of statistics about how kids do well in school, so many of the variables, again, are outside the classroom. And any child who has a positive relationship with an adult is going to do better. And that adult does not have to be someone they're related to. So to anyone who's in the audience here who talks about what we can do to help our youth and students, aside from the kids who may be in your family, are you volunteering? Are you mentoring? And are you having those hard conversations with young people and telling them things they may not want to hear? What I often say to young people is, how are you choosing your friends? Because sometimes you need to let go of some folks. Are you making good decisions? Because we can blame the system all we want, but we have to take responsibility for ourselves. And we can get a second chance if we make a bad decision, but we can't keep repeating mistakes and expecting a different outcome. So it's about being present and saying to young people, I'm an adult, I care about what's good for you, and I want to be there for you. I think that's the most important thing we can do.
All right. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you.
All right. We're going to have two final questions. We'll have a question from the gentleman to my left, and then we'd be honored if Mayor Dellums would ask us a question. Yes.
Good morning. My name is Cedric Hatcher. I'm the founder of an outreach ministry called SONG. S-O-N-G stands for Saving Our Next Generation. And my question today is, oftentimes when we campaign for political office, as far as the White House and as well as the mayor also, first person we reach out to is the church. It's the church. I want to know what are politicians doing today to reach out towards the church, of getting outside of the church, to reach the people in the community. Because the word says faith come by hearing, and hearing it by the word. Not by hearing a politician, a police officer, a school teacher, or a parent, but a preacher. And I'm calling on pastors as well as preachers to come outside the four walls of the church and get involved in the community. Because we have a church on every corner, but we don't have a pastor on every corner.
All right, all right. I'm going to have Mayor Landrieu address that. Let me just say one thing that, again, all mayors won't address it, but your point is very well received by all of us. We know that we're not going to get anything done. That's why I'm so thankful to Mayor Price. You have to have your ministry beyond the walls of the church, which is exactly what you're talking about. In Sacramento, we have the clergy helping us with our gang issues. We have the clergy helping us with our homeless issues. We have the clergy and the faith community helping us with our educational issues. And you guys are best examples here in Birmingham. They're great examples around the country. I'd love for Mayor Landrieu to address this.
A couple things. First of all, I believe that we have, since 1980 in this country, on the issue of violence, low expectations for education, high poverty rates, low birth weight babies, high infant mortality, created a culture of behavior from a personal responsibility perspective that has to change. And government, even on its best day, and as a Democrat, I believe that government can be an active agent for change, cannot replace personal responsibility, strong families, and communities doing what they're supposed to do. And of course, in that space stands like a beacon the pastor or the minister or the community of faith. And so prayer is very important. This church is very important. The civil rights movement was buttressed around the faith-based community. While we talk about this, the first thing that people say is, I don't want to talk about it because we're going to get into the blame game. And so here's how I've decided to process that problem for me. I just want to admit that there are a lot of mistakes that were made by a lot of people over a lot of time, and we can't really figure it out, and we can spend the whole time figuring. So I figure to say it like this: we're not all to blame, but the fact is that today we are all responsible. And so let's get on about figuring out what each of us has to do. Now, I'm not going to speak for any of the mayors on this, but I know there's more that I can do. And it's certainly true that there's more that the church can do, and that we can't do it without them. And so one of the things we try to do in New Orleans, and I'm sure each of the mayors tries to do this, is every time there's a major initiative, that you have to call the preachers together and work with them, or they will call you. So on Saturday, we are going to bury 11-year-old Arabian Gales, who was caught in the crossfire the other day. Actually, she was sleeping on her sofa when there was a drive-by shooting, and the bullet went through the front door and hit her in the head. And the 20 pastors from that neighborhood, the neighborhood that's called Pensiontown in New Orleans, have come together to recommit themselves to do exactly what the gentleman said, was to get outside of the walls of the church, because Sunday service is important, really, really important. So is Wednesday night, right? But at the end of the day, you got to get out into the neighborhood. And one of the things that's happened to churches is the same thing that's happened to playgrounds. As neighborhoods have shifted, playgrounds have become more regional. So kids that are playing at the playground are not necessarily from that neighborhood, and folks that are going to the church are not necessarily from this one. When I was a little boy, I walked down the street to St. Matthias Church. That was the church, that was my neighborhood, it was all close, but now it's more disparate, so it's not as easy. There's a pastor in Baton Rouge called Raymond Jetson, Starlight Baptist Church, who's working with us right now actually to create a formula for pastors, training programs, working with them to talk about how you can actually, not just by starting a new program, but work with your congregation to get into the very neighborhood where your physical church is, in partnership with the city, in communion with the neighborhoods to help do that. But again, this is like, as my grandma used to say, elbow grease. You got to work it. You can't just talk it. And the work requires somebody to show up and to be there and to stay on it, because as Mayor Strickland said, and this is really just almost too simple and too obvious to have to state, but children need to be cared for. They need to be nurtured. They need to be molded into human beings that are productive. And the only person that can do that is an adult. So it's got to be a parent, it's got to be a coach, it's got to be a minister, it's got to be somebody else, a mentor. And unless you do that, there's a good chance that that child is not going to get molded the way you want them, and will find you someplace and hurt you. And then we'll have to be dealing with some of the other issues that we're working on. And so the church is an essential component, because I think, as Mayor Paul said, that trust factor and who actually can communicate to the individual is really critical. And ministers are an essential part of not only our moral authority, but actually putting boots on the ground.
All right, so Ron Dellums, if you would ask your question. I want to close on the faith piece so really quickly, and then have Mayor Dellums ask our final question.
With your permission.
Wait, hold on one sec, Mayor. So one of the things I want to just say in Sacramento, on a positive note, we had a homeless challenge in our community. And what we ended up doing is getting 12 members that were leaderships of our faith community, who then got another 80 plus. So we had all the different denominations in Sacramento saying, we're going to solve this homeless problem together. But the faith community said, we want to lead the way. So what they did is a program called One Day to End Homelessness. And what they did is on a Sunday, they chose one Sunday. It was in March. And every synagogue and Jewish community and the Muslim community, the Christian community, everybody else, they talked to their congregation, and they asked their congregation for them to give 1 day's worth of their rent or mortgage towards solving our homeless problem. We raised $400,000 in one Sunday in Sacramento, that $400,000 leveraged $1.6 million of federal dollars. So this is just an example. We all have them in our community where the faith community has been leading the way and will continue to do so. So thanks for that question. Mayor Dellums, my hero, my role model, you get the final question.
Oh, you're very kind.
You're up.
First of all, with your permission, I would just like to make a couple of very brief comments. I thank all of you, the distinguished panel, for your very extraordinary remarks and inspiring remarks. More importantly, I thank you for bringing poverty front and center. Because I've often said that many elected officials have difficulty even framing the word poverty. We go middle class. We don't talk about poverty. In that regard, I offer a couple quick thoughts. A wonderful, brilliant woman told me many years ago, Ron, never forget this, jobs are not created in a vacuum, that jobs are the byproduct of a community's commitment to solve a problem. If poverty then is a major problem that we're confronted with, let's look at poverty as a multi-dimensional problem, an education dimension, a training dimension, an economic dimension, an environmental dimension, a housing dimension, a health dimension, a justice dimension, a gender dimension, a racial dimension, an age dimension. If we address the dimensions that are an integral part of poverty, we will begin to solve the problem. Example, if housing is one of the dimensions of poverty, we develop a cogent housing policy. Someone has to build, modernize, rehab, and maintain housing. So you solve the housing problem, you strike a mighty blow toward poverty, you generate employment. So all I'm simply saying is let's begin to see the problem-solving strategy as a job creation strategy, and let's keep poverty on the front burner and address poverty as a multidimensional issue, because I think that the poverty program of the 60s, contrary to many people's thought, was a brilliant idea. The reason why they killed it was too brilliant an idea. Thank you very much.
That was our secret weapon and our fifth panelist who we put in the audience to give some comments. At this time, I'd like to thank Mayor Soglin, Mayor Strickland, Mayor Landrieu, and Mayor Nutter. Let's give them a round of applause for their fine input.